an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Shadows for Silence in the Forests of Hell by Brando Sando. A hell of a title. In this episode, which only covers the first half of the story, FYI, we are introduced to a land that is haunted by shades. Shades that have odd predilections and there are rules about it that seem pretty wild, and I'm interested. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Jean for commissioning this episode. It says Jean, but Jacqui, it's you, right? I'm in the chat here, and I'm just realizing that, it says Jean as your username, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's Jacqui, though. Okay, it is Jacqui. So, Jean Jacqui, thank you. Oh, my God, it sounds like I'm saying Jean Jacket. I'm sorry. But thank you so much. This was commissioned because she was interested in me learning a little bit more about the Cosmere, I believe. Is that correct? So there's a foreword to this story that is by Brando Sando. It is about the overall, what caused him to write this story in the first place. I'm going to read this preface a little bit. He was invited by George R. R. Martin, and this is part of the series Dangerous Women, which was an anthology. I actually have read a couple other stories from Dangerous Women, but I don't think I own the anthology itself. I've just read separate shorts from it. And he describes he was looking through genealogies of some Puritan, pilgrims, basically. And there was a woman whose name was Silence, which brought him up short. And I have to admit, pretty fucking baller name. It's a little bit fucked up because women being silenced is such a thing that to name a woman Silence feels particularly pointed. However, it can be turned in another direction and sound really cool. I think using Silence as a name is often effective. George R. R. Martin names one of these one of the ships that a Greyjoy sails on, the Silence, and it's, I think, pretty intimidating. So he says, I was worried that the anthology was going to be stuffed full of women either in the femme fatale vein or the I wear black leather and kick demon butt vein. I've often felt that we in fantasy sometimes do a poor job of representing people, both male and female, who are powerful and capable in ways other than their ability to stand in a fight. Yes, giving a woman a sword is one way to make her dangerous, but I resist making every powerful woman into one who has become so by forcing her way into traditionally male-dominated realms of face-to-face combat. Which, very well put, sir, could not agree more. We don't toughness and danger. They can mean many, many things, as we see. So the world was mostly formed in my head, though over the years I've added the idea of the shades for various reasons. One was to show off a few hints regarding the Cosmere afterlife. And another came during my initial research for the Stormlight Archive, where I read a lot about classical Hebrew life and philosophy. The original idea for Threnody, which I believe is the name of the universe this is set in, is that correct? Was to make a system of magical rules with their roots in the law of Moses and Jewish tradition, not mixing meat with milk, not kindling flames after nightfall on the Sabbath, etc. Many of those rules transformed over the years, leaving their roots behind in the same way that the Stormlight magic system left behind its roots in the fundamental forces of physics. But you can see those hints still having an influence on the tone and setting of the story. So I don't know anything about the other stuff that he has written. a lot of that doesn't mean that much to me, but I do understand having certain things be influenced by a belief system that then gets sort of like altered over time. And that is very compelling. So the story opens up with this character named Dagon. And he is talking about the white fox, who is a bounty hunter, who is so successful and yet unknown that he, and I say he because the white fox is commonly, of course, thought to be a guy, is almost more of a legend than a real person. There's a sense of like, is the white fox even who is getting these people? Is that a thing at all? And Dagon clearly, like, there's a sense to him that almost he doesn't think that the white fox is a real thing. It's like he does and he doesn't, but he's definitely utilizing the lore for his own ends here. So Dagon's drinking companion had a neck like a slender wine bottle and a head like a potato stuck sideways on the top. Ouch. Oh my God. All I could think of is, what is the name of the hamburger cop in the like weird McDonald's universe? I kept picturing like that shape, or like, Arnold from Hey Arnold. And Jacqui says the Hamburglar, but no, there's the Hamburglar, and then there's the guy who's like the constable. You know who I'm talking about? And you would think that they're like related, but they're not. It's a weird, I don't know what's going on with like the McDonald's characters anymore. It's not really as much of a thing. Like when I was a kid, they were utilized in all kinds of imagery and branding for McDonald's, and you just don't see them anymore. They tried to bring a sexy Hamburglar back, you guys, a few years ago. Have you looked into this? Total tangent, but check it out. It's absolutely fucking hysterical. I don't know what they were thinking. Okay, back to this. So, he is telling this guy that you better watch out. You better not cry. The white fox is going to get you tonight. And this guy is like, well, why would the fox come after me? And Dagon's like, well, depends on what kind of shit you did. And this guy's like, what kind of shit? Shit, me? Nothing? I didn't do anything. What do you mean? I have no, not me. And Dagon's just thinking to himself, okay, buddy. Nobody comes here and isn't a criminal. Like, at least in some small way. And this guy, he goes by the name Ernest. Dagon had given his name as Amity. Names didn't mean a whole lot in the forests, or maybe they meant everything. The right ones, that was. Ernest leaned back, scrunching down that fishing pole neck of his, as if trying to disappear into his beer. He'd bite. People liked hearing about the white fox, and Dagon considered himself an expert. At least, he was an expert at telling stories to get ratty men like Ernest to pay for his drinks. You know what? Gotta respect the hustle. I mean, what is anybody ever looking for in life when they're going out for a drink but some entertainment? So, as far as I'm concerned, Dagon is providing the same sort of service that having a TV on above the bar provides, and that's worth something. I'm not mad at that. Dagon leaned back, surveying the room. The merchants were making a nuisance of themselves, calling for food, saying they meant to be on their way in an hour. That proved them to be fools. Traveling at night? In the forests? Good homesteader stock would do it. Men like these, though, they'd probably take less than an hour to violate one of the simple rules and bring the shades upon them. And here, simple rules is capitalized. And as we find out, these merchants are not what they look like. And they're purposely saying that they're going to do stupid shit to make it less obvious that they know what the fuck they're about. Smart. The fellow in the corner, though, dressed all in brown, still wearing his hat despite being indoors, that fellow looked truly dangerous. I wonder if it's him, Dagon thought. Now, we haven't heard anything about that guy once we're in Silence's POV. So I'm going to assume that guy is nothing, or it's going to turn out that he is key at some point later. But it's really funny to know that, like, Dagon is looking at this completely random guy and being like, oh, maybe that's the White Fox. Meanwhile, this bitch is walking right the fuck by him and feeding him his dinner, and he has no idea. The Waystop's owner, Madame Silence, passed by the table and deposited Dagon's meal with an unceremonious thump. Scowling, she topped off his beer, spilling a sudsy dribble onto his hand before limping off. She was a stout woman. Tough. Everyone in the forests was tough. The ones that survived, at least. He'd learned that a scowl from Silence was just her way of saying hello. She'd given him an extra helping of venison. She often did that. He liked to think that she had a fondness for him. Maybe someday. And it turns out that he's like kind of got a little bit of a crush on her and is constant, like, it comes up more than once that he's trying to catch her eye and get her to like soften up a little bit and smile. And I just think this is delightful that this woman who is so prickly and described in a way that isn't like particularly appealing as being like stout and tough has got this guy's attention, and he's just sort of like, yeah, what's up though? You know, I just really enjoy this. The White Fox doesn't go for small timers, and no offense, friend, but you seem pretty small time. But he wouldn't come for me, pretending I'd done something, of course. Anyway, he wouldn't come in here, would he? I mean, Madame Silence's Waystop, it's protected. Everyone knows that. Shade of her dead husband lurks here. I had a cousin who saw it, I did. The White Fox doesn't fear shades. Now, mind you, I don't think he'd risk coming in here. Not because of some shade. Everyone knows this is neutral ground. You've got to have some safe places, even in the forests, but... Well, I could tell you a few things about how the White Fox takes men, but you see, my beer is nearly empty. A shame. I think you'd be very interested in how the White Fox caught Makepeace Hapshire. Great story, that. Makepeace Hapshire. I would be interested. I have my suspicions, now that we've gone on the inside a little bit, but I would still like to hear what he thinks happened. So then we go to Silence's POV. And she has just left the front of house and has gone through the doors to the kitchen and has a moment where she has to collect herself. And we still don't, like, as of right now, are not aware why she's kind of bugging out. But it's quickly revealed to us that the merchants are in disguise, and they are actually part of a crew of guys who are absolute fucking monsters. And there is a girl in her employ is the wrong word. Custody? Guardianship? Who is a victim of his. And it's like, she got away unmarred physically, but heard her mother murdered and was like under the floorboards, soaked in her blood when she was found. This reminded me a little bit of the, in Kill Bill, there is I think Lucy Liu's character when she's a kid. Is that correct? I'm trying to remember. But yeah, this reminded me of that story. Not saying like he's stealing or anything, because this is not an infrequent sort of image. But yeah, the fact that these guys, they're like so well known that I think even if she weren't in custody of this girl, she would still be aware of them. You know, they're pretty, what's the word? Notorious. That's what I want. But the fact that there is like a personal connection as well amplifies this whole thing. And it causes some like emotional stakes later that are almost a hindrance. Like she has to consciously put out of her mind what she knows this man did to someone she cares about, because it could fuck up her whole concentration. which I do appreciate. You know, this isn't a revenge thing exactly. It helps, but that's not why she's doing it. She needs money. That's what this is about. And I respect that. So she comes in and she tells William Ann, her daughter, and it's wild to me. Her name is William Ann, but there it is. She tells her to go and get the bounty book. And her daughter, I think it's her daughter, right? William Ann, yeah, that's her daughter, because the guy later on is like, oh, is she a bastard? And I was like, dude, can you just not? She thinks that what her mother is freaking out about is the dude with the potato head. And her mom is like, girl, no, that guy, he's nothing. Like, it's not, absolutely not him. And then she opens the book and finds the picture, and William Ann realizes who she means. Chesterton Divide. I am dying to know how he comes up with these names. What we've got Makepeace and Chesterton. I guess this is him going through like puritanical, like if that's where he got the name Silence, I'm going to say that maybe this is where he got these names. But what a name. He walked right into our hands with 4 of his men. The bounty on those 5 would be enough to pay her supply needs for a year, maybe 2. Her eyes flickered to the words below the pictures printed in harsh, bold letters. Extremely dangerous. Wanted for murder, rape, extortion. And of course, there was the big one at the end. And assassination. I love that that's the big one. It feels like that seems to be as bad as the others, not necessarily more bad. But he is the governor, like, you know what I mean. The governor is going to get more attention. Silence had always wondered if Chesterton and his men had intended to kill the governor of the most powerful fort city on this continent, or if it had been an accident. And this is the first time, I think, that we see the word fort city. And it's not gone into that much. There's a lot of this universe that Brando Sando either is assuming readers will already know what it is, or it's just not that necessary and we can probably piece it together from context clues. But what it sounds like we've got are people who live out in the forested areas and are just extremely cautious about shades and follow the rules, but live out in the open and do the best they can. And then there are people who live in these fortresses locked away from the outside, allegedly safer than they would be if they were out in the open. But it comes with so many drawbacks that for a lot of people, it's really not worth it. And I'm going to assume that some of those drawbacks are just human beings, you know? I mean, you can try and get yourself away from the monsters, but like, it's the tale as old as time. Man is the real monster. So I don't know how successful that tends to be. But yeah, before the incident, he had been a common, if accomplished, highway bandit. Now he was something greater and far more dangerous. Chesterton knew that if he were captured, there would be no mercy, no quarter. Lastport had painted Chesterton as an anarchist, a menace, and a psychopath. Chesterton had no reason to hold back, so he didn't. Which, I mean, that is one way to live. But you don't I guess the point is the suggestion that he had been holding back in the first place. You know, what he's saying essentially is Chesterton had been a bandit because he was attempting to rein in his impulses and just be a sort of petty criminal. And once he reached this point where he either made this mistake or this conquest, depending on how you see it, he just decided to fucking let it out. And it sounds pretty awful. And I guess the guys that follow him are also psychopaths. I'm picturing with Chesterton, honestly, a very oh my God, what is his name? Gregor Clegane. somebody who's just sort of roaming the countryside looking for people to fuck with and take things from. And that's the fun. That's what he enjoys. You know, it's not just a way to survive. It is a pastime. So William Ann, even though she, like, her mother is telling her this guy is out there, she can't place which person out there is this guy. He is in disguise well enough that even looking for him, it's not easy to pick him out of the crowd. And she finally figures it out, and it's like, this seems foolish. Why is he going about perfectly visible like this, even in disguise? Everyone will remember just another band of fool merchants from the fort who thought they could brave the forests. It's a clever ruse. When they vanish from the path in a few days, it'll be assumed, if anyone cares to wonder, that the shades got them. Besides, this way Chesterton can travel quickly and in the open, visiting way stops and listening for information. Forgive me, guys. I'm going to grab a blanket here. I think Owen turned the air down when he got home, and I am freezing. It's like blowing right down the back of my neck. So she thinks to herself, maybe this is how he discovered good targets to hit. And she even wonders if maybe he's come through her way stop before and she just didn't recognize him. Which, honestly, that is something that hadn't even occurred to me. And I was like, you know, anytime that you enter a story like this, you assume the moment these people are spotted has to be also the first time they've ever been here. But I like that it occurs to her, I didn't figure out who he was right away. So there's a time where maybe he came in and it was busier, you know, and I just totally like served him dinner and didn't fucking notice, which truly is, that's the kind of thing that you have to feel like you're sort of enabling a person like this, you know? So this is when she asks, where's Sabruki, who is the little girl that her, like, basically entire household, and it sounds like the household had a lot of people in it, so I'm assuming it's like her parents and servants and brothers and sisters, but they never really get specific. And William Ann says she's feeding the pigs, which of course I thought these were like hogs for butchering, but then we find out that pigs are supposed to keep shades away. And I am dying to know if that's genuinely true or if that's just like an old wives' tale. Do we ever get to see a pig chase a shade? Because I would pay money to watch a pig chasing a ghost around. That sounds amazing. Imagine like getting to include pigs in your like Halloween decor. Like that becomes a thing. I could carve like a little pig face into a pumpkin to like keep the demons away. I love this 100%. Pigs are just great, you know, not to say that I won't eat a pig, because I will eat the fuck out of a pig, but they're also smart and adorable. So yeah, William Ann is like, so we gonna kill them, right? And her mom is like, oh, obviously. Yeah. And she asks, how much are they worth? And Silence says, sometimes it's not about what a man's worth. But as she says it, she's like, but like it definitely is right now. So William Ann is just like, all right, I'm going to go get the poison. And what they do is they give them like a half dose of something that blends with the beer so that they get like woozy and lightheaded, but it's not like they're dropping dead at their tables in the, you know, nobody can know that Silence is the white fox. That's the whole point of this honeypot. People could never dream that it could be her. She has to set everything up so that these people, their defenses are down in an area far enough away that she can follow up and take advantage, but nobody will ever connect her to the apprehensions. So Jacqui in the chat, these are the kinds of thoughts I'm paying for. Pig Halloween. I'm saying They've got, oh man, I'm going to search pig Halloween later because I bet those Google results are a good time. I bet there are some really great photos of pigs in costumes and things. I'm interested. Okay. So she went into the pantry to put away the bounty book. Here, too, the walls had been scrubbed clean, the shelves freshly sanded and dusted. That child. Who had heard of a child who would rather clean than play? Of course, given what Sabruki had been through. Yeah, that makes sense. There is nothing like being soaked in the blood of a parent, and she has to sit there under those floorboards for a minute to make you then obsessed with cleanliness forever after. That makes 100% logical 1 + 1 sense to me. It's not the kind of thing that I would think of on my own, I don't think. But when you say it out loud, I'm like, oh, well, yeah, no, that's definitely fair. Silence could not help reaching onto the top shelf and feeling the crossbow she kept there. Silver bolt heads. She kept it for shades and hadn't yet turned it against a man. Drawing blood was too dangerous in the forests. It still comforted her to know that in case of a true emergency, she had the weapon at hand. A little bit too at hand, as it turns out, because Sabruki is out here about to take a man down in the midst of a fucking tavern and do so with no regrets or consideration for the consequences of the people around her in any way at all. It's pretty intense. And I'm not like, I think she's described as 8 years old. I love it because at one point she says something to Silence like, I'm not a child. And I'm like, you're 8. You're 8. You're 8 years old. You are a single digit number. Yes, you are. What are you talking about? So, and she's just kind of like glad that Sabruki isn't out here. I don't think that she is worried that Chesterton will recognize Sabruki so much as notice that Sabruki doesn't look enough like Silence to assume that she's her daughter. And then he would begin to think about what that connection could be and start to recognize her, kind of thing. What a difference 1 year could make. Once, Silence would have sworn that this child would never smile again. Sabruki had spent her first 3 months at the waystop staring at walls. No matter where Silence had put her, the child had moved to the nearest wall, sat down, and stared at it all day, never speaking a word. Again, thinking about, she was trapped under floorboards. She was like in a crawl space under floorboards. So I am imagining she is reconstructing the view from under the floor to make herself feel safe. That's what I'm putting together. And I don't know that that's what he's intending, but that was like, it was simultaneously a place that saved her life and also a place that like she kind of hasn't left yet. And so staring at planks of a wall is going to put her back there somehow mentally, you know? That just makes a lot of sense also. He's very good. I'm just saying he's very good. So, Sabruki says that she's cleaning the pig shack because the pigs like it to be clean. Well, Jerem and Ezekiel prefer it that way. The others don't seem to care. I absolutely want to know how she knows. What are Jerem and Ezekiel doing? Do they just come hang out every time it's clean? And they, like, once it starts to get dirty, they're just like, ugh, whatever. And they take off. Like, what about their behavior makes it seem that are they just happier when it's clean? Do they just like seem a little bit more upbeat? Because you know how it is. You guys have pets, right? There are things that you're like, oh, they like this. And it's hard to describe what in their behavior makes it so clear, but you're looking at them and you're like, obviously, they are delighted by this whole situation. And I really want to see happy pigs. I'm very distracted by the pigs. Okay. So Silence then does this thing. And I'm just like, girl, you could just have not said anything. She's like, why don't you keep at it in here for a while? And I'm like, bitch, she was gonna. You could have just not drawn attention to the fact and it would have been fine. But you had to go and be all fucking, like, not subtle about it. And now Sabruki looks over and is like, what's up? What's going on? Why do you want me to stay here? What's happening out there? What do you mean? And Silence tries to take a firm hand and be like, if you don't fucking stay here, like I told you, I'll whip your ass. And Sabruki rolls her eyes, and Silence is like, well, she responds well to sternness. She seems to crave it. And I'm like, this girl rolled her eyes at you, Silence. No, it did not work. I don't know what you think obedience looks like, but rolling her eyes when you threaten to beat her with a switch does not, for me, sound like somebody who feels threatened in any way. I get it. You don't want to threaten her because she's traumatized. But also, you're fooling yourself. And it is not a surprise later when Sabruki is sitting out in the fucking back room with a crossbow, with the bolt in place, and it all strung up because a bitch is not listening. Silence was a Four Scout, the surname taken by her grandparents and the others who had left homeland first and explored this continent. So, again, with like very vague backstory on Homeland, which it's like there is an evil that has taken over and people have fled, but I have no idea what the evil looks like. I don't know if the shades are the evil itself, or if the shades are like a side effect, or if they are unrelated but another part of the universe. It might not be, they may not be part and parcel. So she crossed the backyard, noting William Ann inside the kitchen mixing a paste to dissolve in the beer. Silence passed her by and looked in on the stable. Unsurprisingly, Chesterton had said they'd be leaving after their meal. While a lot of folk sought the relative safety of a way stop at night, Chesterton and his men would be accustomed to sleeping in the forests. Even with the shades about, they would feel more comfortable in a camp of their own devising than they would in a way stop bed. So, she goes into the stable, and there's this guy, Dobb, this old stable hand who is a little bit simple, and she tells him to go take his break and works on getting the horses saddled and ready. But what she's actually doing is putting something into the feed bags of these horses that will cause them to have to pee sooner, and what she puts in the pouch will be in their urine when they pee, and it will show up basically like under the equivalent of a black light, so that she will be able to trace their path in the forest via the urine left on the ground by the horses, which is just straight up genius. I love this so much. What a great idea. And she's in the midst of setting this up and leaves the pouches of the stuff out on the table as a dude named Theopolis comes walking in. And I have to say, this doesn't often happen. I often talk about like fan casting for different things that I'm covering, trying to come up with an actor that I would have be this character. And it can be really hard for me to like put a finger on somebody. And then occasionally a character will roll in and I'm just like, oh, this is that guy. Theopolis is Robert Carlyle. That is who I am picturing. I do not know why that is who he is, but that is who he is. Robert Carlyle is so good at being threatening while maintaining this sort of civil veneer and being a little bit dapper, honestly. But that like undercurrent of violence, he's very excellent. And I just feel him right here. It would just be so good. So yeah, this dude is a tax collector, basically. And, it's not hidden that is what he is. He doesn't wear markings of his station, but he's got clothing that's new enough and neat enough. It's just obvious that he's not somebody who's like scraping in the ground for a living, And she's just like, what the fuck are you here for? And he tells her, well, you didn't pay me for last month. And she's like, I will. It's coming. And he tells her that she also still owes him for the bolts for the crossbows. And I was just like, ooh, God. And he says, in the shipment of replacement sections for your protection rings, we wind up finding out later on exactly how that works. But she has like hoops of silver embedded in concentric circles in the ground around the wayhouse to keep the silver works as essentially an electric fence. So these shades will like float up to it and it'll zap them and then they'll just like turn and float off. But when they hit the silver like gets fucked up and destroyed and is no longer effective. So it's not like it's something that you can just put up and it's fine. You have to replace the pieces every time. So that's why it's various hoops buried instead of one long piece of silver that runs around to make it easier to replace those parts. That said, the hoops are sunk into chunks of concrete like a foot into the ground. That way, people who are looking for a little protection for themselves can't just roll on by and grab a hoop up out of the ground and saunter off. Like, they are difficult to dig up and replace. Difficult enough that doing it is a major cramp in the balls. But it's also why people come to the way station, because they know it's safe. So, yeah. He has apparently provided this stuff for her on credit, which sucks. So he calls her the White Fox. It turns out he knows who she is because he is the guy that she brings her bounties to. And she has to work with him, even though she kind of finds him repellent. So he can tell from how she's acting that she has a bounty. And he thinks that the bag of wet leak sap, which is the stuff that she's putting in the feed bags, he thinks that she just attaches the bag to a saddle, pokes a very small hole in it, and it dribbles on the ground as the horses trot off, and she follows that. But it's like, that is actually kind of too simplistic because they'd maybe find the bag, and it would be probably pretty clear what that bag was there for once they recognized what the substance inside was, which not only makes it so that they could just take the bag off and chuck it into the forest and you can no longer track them, but they would probably put together where on their little trip that they acquired said bag and come back and fuck you the hell up. I mean, nice try, Theopolis, but obviously you're an amateur, so sit down, sweetie. So anyway, I've been tempted to turn you in lately, you know. Many a group keeps a betting pool on the identity of the infamous fox. I could be a rich man with this knowledge, You're already a rich man. And though you're many things, you are not an idiot. This has worked just fine for a decade. Don't tell me you'd trade wealth for a little notoriety. He smiled, but did not contradict her. He kept half of what she earned from each bounty. It was a fine arrangement for Theopolis. No danger to him, which was how she knew he liked it. He was a civil servant, not a bounty hunter. The only time she'd seen him kill the man he'd murdered couldn't fight back. And I'm like, ooh, what was that about? I kind of feel like it might have been her husband. I don't know if she'd still work with him if that were the case. But I don't know what happened to her husband. Actually, it can't have been. Because he says something about how people talk about her husband, but there is no record of her having been married. So, scratch that. I really want to know who it was, though. And he tries to be like, ooh, let me go look in the common room and find out who it is. And she's like, the fuck you will. And I was just like, this guy... It's not just like the fact that he's extorting her, basically. It's the fact that he keeps needling her like this. He feels like an 11-year-old boy with an older brother who is trying to the older brother is trying to get away with something without their parents finding out. And the little brother doesn't seem to realize the danger to himself if they get caught as well, and just finds it fun to kind of poke and prod. And it just, what are you doing, guy? just fucking stop it. You're about to make so much money too. Like, if he knew who was sitting there, I think he would change his tune really fucking fast. But there it is. So this is when he takes out a piece of paper, and it's a writ of seizure, an authorization for Silence's creditors, Theopolis, to claim her property as payment. He is going to repossess her house. I mean, it's not repossessing because it did not originally belong to him. But yeah, he could take her property and she would still be obligated to work and be under his thumb, but it would no longer belong to her in any way. And it would just put her in this position of like zero power and real danger, potentially. And she's like, would you really do this? You're going to fuck up what we have. And he says, well, no, I wouldn't do that. It would be more efficient if I took over the finances. You'd remain working and hunting bounties as you always have, only you would no longer have to worry about your debts. You'd turn me and mine into slaves, Theopolis. Oh, don't be so dramatic. Those in Lastport have begun to worry that such an important waypoint as this is owned by an unknown element. You're drawing attention. I should think that's the last thing you want. Silence crumpled the paper in her hand. Horses shuffled in their stalls. Theopolis grinned. Well, perhaps it won't be needed. Perhaps this bounty of yours is a big one, Any clues to give me so I don't sit wondering all day? Get out, she whispered. Oh my God, this guy. What a pain in the balls. So yeah, it ends with him basically being like, doesn't seem like you were ever married, which would make William Anne, and she cuts him off. I wonder if it's because of societally what it means for William Anne to be a bastard, or if it's just that William Anne doesn't know and has maybe been told a story about who her father was. Maybe both. So she winds up setting this all up and thinking about how her grandmother would have killed Theopolis. And we get a couple of like references to her grandmother throughout this section. Her grandmother was clearly a hard ass, stone cold bitch. This woman was nobody to fuck with. And she is trying to not be like that, which it's a tough thing, I'm sure, to balance being a human being with also being like a ruthless killer like she clearly is. And even more so, she is trying to make it so that William Anne doesn't wind up in that position, and thinks about how if her grandmother could see William Anne, she would be disgusted with her, and how that is a good thing. And this is something that I was talking with Rashawn about on the Dresden Files, because there's a moment, mild spoilers, there was a character with a kid, and the character had a really bad childhood, and their own kid is having the time of their life. And they're watching their kid thinking how they would have killed to have this kind of childhood. And we talked for a while about what it's like for people who grew up in tough situations to have children, and that child winds up a lot more fortunate, and how you must simultaneously feel a lot of like gratitude for the fact that they will never experience the shit that you went through, but also maybe a little bit of jealousy or even resentment because they will never fully appreciate how lucky they are because they never went through it. And yet you don't want them to fully appreciate it in that way. You don't want them to have to go through it. So it's this weird place that you have to occupy where you're like proud that you're able to provide them with a better life, and you're glad that they will never know the kinds of hardship that you experienced, but also you have to like rein in impatience or envy at times, and how hard that's probably like that. Not everybody manages to do that. There are parents who hold it against their kids for sure. And I had that a little bit with my father. He was an immigrant. He grew up so poor with an abusive father. And with my dad, it was this weird thing where, like, he would not beat my mom. He would not beat me. And as far as he was concerned, that was him being like a model husband, you know, bar on the floor kind of thing. And so that was an improvement. And that sort of meant that, like, he could do whatever else as a shitty action. But he was at least better than this and wasn't inflicting that on us. And it was weird growing up because, like, I could tell he was glad that I was, like, in such a better place. I was educated. I was going to be able to get, like, a real job. I was living in a way that he would only have dreamed of. But he was also really frustrated by the fact that I didn't, like, want to go get a job right away. When he started working, probably when he was like 10 years old, and I'm over here at 18, kind of like, yeah, I'll get to it, you know? And I think it was really hard for him watching that and simultaneously being, like, relieved and grateful and also irritated. So anyway, that's obviously, like, Silence is coping with it better. She is very, very aware of the fact that William Ann is, like, lucky, but also tough and probably will be able to carry on this work, but isn't going to be so inhuman about it. All the stories about her grandmother, like the vague impressions that we're getting, are that this lady was, like, maybe the kind of violent that was a little bit gratuitous at times, perhaps. And there's also an interesting thing about the fire in the hearth of the Way House. Apparently, striking a flame can draw shades. But if you have a flame already going and you, like, you know, put a candle to it to light that candle, that's fine. The flame that's already going does not seem to interest them. It's the act of starting a new fire that pulls them in. And so her grandmother started the fire that's in the Way House at risk of her own life. It was genuinely something that was, like, it's like against one of the simple rules. But she did it and survived, and they have kept that same fire going this entire time. And I love that because there are a lot of, like, anthropologically, there are a lot of cultures that it was punishable by death to let the village fire go out. Especially there were peoples who were nomadic, and starting a new fire was so difficult that they would, like, assign somebody to hold the coals for the previous fire while they traveled, and then kindle a new fire wherever they reached. And if that person was irresponsible and didn't keep those coals alive, it could go very badly for them. So I find this to be kind of a fun, like, hearkening back to that, but the stakes are extremely different. And I just think that's kind of cool. So this moment is interesting. Behind her, the forests shivered in the wind. Silence listened, then turned to face them. You could tell fort folk by the way they refused to face the forests. They averted their eyes, never looking into the depths. Those solemn trees covered almost every inch of this continent, those leaves shading the ground, still, silent. Animals lived out there, but fort surveyors declared that there were no predators. The shades had gotten those long ago, drawn by the shedding of blood. Staring into the forests seemed to make them retreat. The darkness of their depths withdrew. The stillness gave way to the sound of rodents picking through fallen leaves. A forescout knew to look the forests straight on. A forescout knew that the surveyors were wrong. There was a predator out there. The forest itself was one. I like this. I really want to know what the deal is with these forests. What's going on? So this is when she walks in and finds Sabruki sitting there with a fucking crossbow out. And Sabruki is like, I'm about to kill this motherfucker. So that's that. And Silence tells her this won't work. Even if you lift that thing, You can't hit him. And even if you hit him, he's got 4 guys with him who will kill us. I wouldn't mind, so long as I got to kill him. So long as I pulled the trigger. You care nothing for us? Silence snapped. I take you in, give you a home, and this is your payment? You steal a weapon? You threaten me? What is wrong with you? You'd shed blood in this place of sanctuary, bring the shades down upon us, beating at our protections? If they got through, they'd kill everyone under my roof, people I've promised safety. How dare you? Good for you, girl. She just framed this in such a way that it was just kind of like, you can't get away from what she's fucking saying here. I love it. Sabruki shook as if coming awake. Her mask broke and she dropped the crossbow. Silence heard a snap and the catch released. She felt the bolt pass within an inch of her cheek, then break the window behind. I have got to be honest, I was super worried that breaking this window was going to draw this guy's attention, and this was going to be the fucking end of everything. I genuinely was like, oh no. And she is so worried that Sabruki maybe grazed her and drew some blood and is really relieved that's not the case, because as it turns out, the other rule is never to draw the blood of another. You can draw your own blood. You can have a nosebleed. You can have your period. But if you hurt someone else, the shades, it seems like it's almost like they're drawn to the violence. It's not even the blood, you know? And it clearly actually is the blood, because she's able to inflict wild violence later. And because the blood doesn't fall out of the bags, they don't come over there. But nevertheless, you get what I mean. But yeah, they will go after the person who shed the blood first. They'll like frenzy. And then anybody who happens to be nearby, it's like over for them. Like, you don't have to actually be involved in what just happened to be a target, because now they've lost their minds. And this is when Sabruki says, I heard it all. Mother never cried out. She knew I was there. She was strong. That was why I could be strong, even when the blood came down, soaking my hair. I heard it all. I heard it all. In the smoldering remains of the homestead, Silence had found the corpses of 12 people. Chesterton and his men had slaughtered every family member right down to the children. The only one left had been Sabruki, the youngest, who had been shoved into the crawl space under the floorboards in the bedroom. So, and Sabruki is asking her why. Like, why did he do this? And Silence is just like, there isn't a reason. Like, I'm sorry, but that's just, there isn't one. And when Sabruki asks for justice, she's like, I will kill him, but justice is not a thing. Just FYI. He'll die, and I will do it, but that's not really going to make you feel better. Just, he'll be gone, and you will be able to live knowing that this guy is dead, but it's not going to help necessarily. So this is when she brings Sabruki some sleeping potion, and Sabruki drinks it without much of a fuss. Although I am concerned she's going to somehow turn up later. I don't know how that's going to go. So she sings to her, and then we have her packing up the rucksack to head out. And I kept on thinking that she was going to take horses. And then I realized, like, one of the other simple rules is not to run at night. For some reason, making sudden movements in the daytime doesn't mess with the perception of the shades. If you make sudden movements at night, that will draw their attention. Drawing blood, though, that works during the day and at night. It seems like the sudden movements is the only thing that it's night only that seems to happen. So, of course, she's not going to take horses, I would guess, because they're going to be sudden movements, which could draw attention. However, Chesterton and his men were riding horses. So do they just train the horses to, like, be really slow or move really carefully? Do the horses learn to move carefully because they watch other horses who don't get eaten alive? I'm very curious about that, because it seems pretty clear it's not just human beings that the shades go after. It seems like the description of how there are no predators left in the woods, that implies that the shades go after animals also. It's totally indiscriminate. So riding horses feels like risky AF to me. And maybe they just bed down by night. Maybe they head out while it's still light enough that the shades aren't super sensitive yet. I don't know. I'm just, I'm sure that he has thought of these logistics, because if there is anything Brando Sando's good at, it's the fucking details. So anyway, she is packing things up, and William Ann comes out and is like, hey, what's up? I'm definitely coming with you. And Silence is like, the fuck you are. And William Ann has to basically be like, okay, you old hag. I know you think you can keep doing all this shit by yourself, but you're weak, and there's 5 of them. So you're going to have to start teaching me how to do all of this and letting me help you. And Silence finally just is like, oh, that's true. Okay, fine. And lets her come. And we get our first look at the shades. Evidently, they're out all day. It's just that you can't see them during the day. At night, there's this soft glow that's like white. And we find out later, when their attention is drawn, they begin to like change to black. Like there's this bleeding of color through them. And eventually, when their full attention is gotten, their eyes turn green and sort of like mist green out of the sockets. Sockets in quotes, because evidently the older that shades get, the more their faces sort of like diminish and their overall shape begins to fall away, and they just become this vague blur. Which I really like the idea of. This is like the Haunting of Bly Manor. This is a thing there where like your face begins to disappear if you are a ghost there and a long time passes. And it sort of reminds me of that. You just lose the parts of you that identify you as a person or having been a person. That falls away. And I'm wondering, like, do you eventually disappear? Do shades get so old that they vanish? Or are they just like extremely insubstantial? Jacqui says, not being able to see them during the day creeps me the fuck out. Yeah, no kidding. I mean, I think a lot of people like believe that's how ghosts work anyway, but because we know how many there are out here, it's not like, oh, there's a ghost wandering around. It's like there's a school of piranhas outside, and in the day they're still there, but you can't tell they're there. I mean, that's like got a whole different vibe. So they head out, and as they are tracking the horses, Silence is sort of reprimanding William Ann for not being more scared. And William Ann insists that she is, but Silence suspects not enough still. And eventually, when they actually reach the camp and she catches a glimpse of William Ann's face, she is like startled to see that William Ann doesn't look scared and doesn't look excited. She looks angry, really angry. And I was like, well, that makes sense to me. But later on, she kind of thinks to herself, like, I can't let myself get too angry because that's going to fuck up my jam here. I gotta focus. And that also makes sense. So the first person that they come across, and I should mention too that they have a conversation about belief in God on their way, which of course Brando Sando cannot resist, right? He just always has to have characters who argue about theology. So she says, it's important to me now why you don't believe. You're wrong about me not being afraid. I can hardly breathe. But I do know how much trouble the way stop is in. You're always so angry after Master Theopolis visits. And you think this has to do with God? Why? William Ann kept looking down. Oh, shadows, Silence thought. She thinks we're being punished. Fool girl. Foolish as her father. What? What does that mean? So, they pass the old bridge. There is a new bridge that apparently fell apart. Sounds right. And Silence finally says, I believe in the God beyond, but I don't worship. Doesn't mean I don't believe in it. But they called this land in the old books the home of the damned. I doubt worshiping does any good if you're already damned. That's all. This kind of reminded me, if you guys have seen Pitch Black, which if you haven't, you should, because it's super fun. But there is a character in that who, he is like a pilgrim or sort of a priest type. And he is talking to Vin Diesel's character and asks him why he doesn't believe in God. And Vin Diesel says, oh, you got it wrong. I absolutely believe in God. And I hate the motherfucker. And that just made a lot of sense. I can understand that vibe. Just being like, oh no, I think there's something out there. And it's a piece of shit who sucks. So fuck that. You know what? I can respect it. I don't necessarily agree, but I 100% get why you'd feel that way. I mean, there's a lot of evidence to support that it's a piece of shit. So they get to the first dude who is the like watch. And it's a very tough moment because she has to strangle the guy. And of course he like flails while he's being garroted. And by the way, this method of killing is chosen because it won't shed blood. So she's avoiding the blood, which seems like the blood draws attention faster and more severely than motion. Because he flails and they begin to stop and start to turn, but it doesn't actually trigger them completely. I'm going to, let's see, here it is. She shuffled backwards, still holding tightly, watching those shades. They looked around like animals sniffing the air. A few of them started to dim, their own faint natural luminescence fading, their forms bleeding from white to black. Not a good sign. There's something about the fact that they turn black when it's dark out that makes it so much worse, because that means that you can see them initially, and then you can tell when they're beginning to tune in, and then they disappear. I guess if their eyes glow green, you can still like pinpoint them based on that. But otherwise they're invisible, which feels extremely unnerving. I mean, I'm sure by the time they turn totally black and their eyes are totally green, it's kind of over, but... So, she has gone off ahead to take care of this guy and then goes back to get William Ann. And I like the detail that when she goes back to William Ann, she can't see her because William Ann has gotten so skilled at hiding herself. And she's like kind of proud of that. So they go to the camp and the four men are around the fire. And they had set a small, I say a fire, they had set a small jar of glow paste at the center of the camp, inside a pit so it wouldn't glow too brightly and give them away, but it was enough light to show the horses tethered a few feet away on the other side of the camp. So this is how they do it. They wrap these guys' heads in burlap sacks that are tarred inside so that they don't leak. And then they take out hammers and smash their heads in, which is honestly so metal. This is really fucking intense. Like, it is cold-blooded in a way that you don't get to see women be in stories very often. You know, it's just, I really enjoyed this. And the feel of like how much of a chore this is to the two of them. There's not a lot of passion to it. That's not to say that they're not nervous, but it's like nervous in the way that you are when you have to climb a ladder and clean the gutters out. Like, it's not, you know what I mean? It's just, there's just a sort of workaday sense to the way this is carried out. That's just like, hey, here we go, you know? And there's a little more than that because of who these people are. But in general, you know? So eventually there is a dude who like sits up and asks, what? Silence leaped for him, grabbing him by the shoulders and slamming him to the ground. Nearby shades spun about as if at a loud noise. Silence pulled her garrote out as the man heaved at her, trying to push her aside, and William Ann gasped in shock. Silence rolled around, wrapping the man's neck. She pulled tight, straining while the man thrashed, agitating the shades. She almost had him dead when the last man leapt from his bedroll. In his dazed alarm, he chose to dash away. And for a minute, I was like, good, let the shades kill him. That's fine. He'll have run off, so hopefully they won't be drawn to you because he'll be far enough away. And then she's like, no, they'll turn him to dust. I need a body. I won't make any money. These guys aren't fucking worth anything. We need Chesterton. And I was like, oh, no. So he chases after him, and luckily the poison is still working on him, so he is not quite with it. He's with it enough to know who she is and what she did, but not enough to actually like stay on his feet and keep it going. Silence slammed her hammer into his arm, causing him to scream. Then she brought it down on his face with a crunch. She ripped off her sweater as he groaned and thrashed, somehow wrapping it around his head and the hammer. And I was like, you are really lucky that didn't just cause a spray of blood, because his face, like, that's where your nose is, and your nose is like, it's so easy to cause a nosebleed. It is wild how easy it is. I kind of don't buy that she'd have been able to like make that kind of attack and there wouldn't be blood right away. But it's fine. I'm not mad about it. But like when you stop and think about it, it's unlikely. Nevertheless, she wraps him with the sweater. The blood starts to soak through. And this is the thing where it's like, it's starting to soak through. And I'm thinking that this is going to draw them. But it seems like you can't let the blood hit the ground or something. Like, it feels like there's a different requirement than I thought. And William Ann comes around and she wraps his head in the sack. Silence reached to the side with a frantic hand and grabbed a stone, then smashed it into the sack-covered head. The sweater muffled Chesterton's screams, but also muffled the rock. She had to beat again and again. He finally fell still. Silence dared to look up. Dozens of green eyes hung in the forest, glowing like little fires in the blackness. Oh, God! And they can't run. Like, that's possibly the worst thing that they can do. And they just sit totally still and just hope. And they eventually begin to fade away. And William Ann calls it a miracle. And Silence is like, no, it's luck. And this section ends with William Ann saying, what would it take for you to see a miracle instead of a coincidence? It would take a miracle, obviously, instead of just coincidence. And that is the end of this section. So there will be one more episode covering the second half. And I am extremely interested. I cannot wait to find out what happens here. I'm so over time. I really have to wrap. But thank you again, Jacqui, for commissioning this. This is super fun. Oh, no, Jacqui says, I'm so sorry it'll be a month. I didn't realize it was so long, but that's okay. I'll probably read this right away, and then I will just come back and reread it before recording. So, all right, cool. Thank you guys again very much for hanging out and listening, and thank you, Jacqui. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
was an Unspoiled Network podcast.